Good afternoon everyone, here are 5 upcoming less known open world RPG or survival games that I'm really excited for. Before we start, I need to qualify the type of games that I really enjoy. I tend to like most single player games that have a strong emphasis on exploration. So either survival games with light RPG elements, like Valheim for example, or RPGs with light survival elements, like Outwards or Fallout 4. In all cases, a very strong focus on exploration, significant loot impact, junk economy, crafting and base building also are elements of a gameplay loop that I tend to enjoy. Lastly, while I tend to not enjoy so much turn-based games and games with designs that target younger audiences, Pokemons for example, or most JRPGs, and that's a pity because I live in Japan. I would typically look at Skyrim, Fallout 4, The Witcher 3 or Valheim as games which will be hitting the sweet spots for me. I will be focusing on indie games or at most AA games, so I will leave out games such as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 for instance. And as Cohh, the very famous YouTuber, streamer and now developer mentioned it, the best way to help those games, if you find any of those games that you really are interested in, the best way to help is to wishlist them on Steam. So if any game interests you, go on Steam and wishlist it now. Now that we are clear on what I like and what I tend to focus on, here are 5 upcoming lesser known games that I'm really excited for. Starting with Subnautica 2. Subnautica 2 is a sequel to the incredibly successful Subnautica and Sub-Zero games. An exploration adventure taking place in an underwater world. The developer, Unknown World Entertainment, have proven that they are able to deliver games that are providing a compelling sense of discovery in a compelling universe. Oh, I found that very compelling personally. They are able to provide entertaining base building and crafting mechanics. And if you didn't have thalassophobia before, which is the fear of large bodies of water, well, you may well have such phobia after playing the game. Subnautica 2's early access window has been pushed back several times, and it is now anticipated to release in early access in the second half of 2025. Moving on with Alkahest. Alkahest is an upcoming first-person fantasy action-adventure RPG. The game features dynamic melee combat with a highly interactive environment where the player can use objects in the environment as weapons. Instead of magic, the game focuses on alchemy, allowing the player to create potions and other types of substances. The game is set in a world which I really much like. It's a dark fantasy medieval kingdom world, very similar to Skyrim. In this case, the kingdom is called Kadanar. The kingdom is steeped in feudal turmoil with 3 main houses vying for control. So let's see, maybe we can have some faction quests and so on. We play as the son of a local lord who is investigating unusual goblin activity, exploring castles and forests and villages, and I really like the style that they are going for, and apparently the very strong focus on exploration. The studio, Push On, is entirely made of gamers, which is definitely a good news in this day and age. It is currently expected that the game will release late 2025 or early 2026. Next is Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, a game that is already in early access. The Fall of Avalon is a dark fantasy open world RPG set in a world on the verge of ruin, I would say. In this game, King Arthur is dead, or is he? And all the myths and legends are failing. The human living in Avalon are desperately trying to find new ways of life and things to believe in. The land of Avalon is slowly sinking into weirdness. I need to practice that. It's between weird and word. It's not an easy word to pronounce. Weirdness. And that land is torn apart by conflict. Act 1 of the game is already in early access, and I will link my playthrough as well as the early access review in the description. The game is grim, dark, and while I'm not particularly interested in the story of King Arthur, I found the lore a lot more compelling than I expected. Exploration is key, rewarding your gameplay, impacting loot in completely unmarked locations, and I loved it. The combat and the RPG progression systems are serviceable, but still a little bit janky, so something that the devs are currently actively working on. I had a fantastic time personally going through Act 1, and I really look forward to the full game release, which is currently expected in Q2 2025, so in the April, May, June timeframe. Moving on to the Wayward Realms. The Wayward Realms is an upcoming open-world RPG developed by Witshlist Games. The game is led by Ted Peterson and Julian Lefebvre. So if you guys don't know, those are former Bethesda developers. Best work for their work on the Elder Scrolls series. The game is designed as a spiritual successor to Daggerfall, Elder Scrolls 2. The game is set on a group of over 100 islands, known collectively as the Archipelago. Witshlist Game was founded by Ted Peterson and Julian Lefebvre and Ian Phoenix in 2019, so over 5-6 years ago. The studio aims to create games that capture the essence of Elder Scrolls games, and that is fantastic news. Currently, with the information we have, the Wayward Realms is expected to have an early access window in maybe late 2025, and a full release might take an additional 1 or 2 years. So we're looking at late 2025 for early access and a full launch window late 2026 or early 2027. Lastly, and maybe for me the most anticipated game of this list so far, Outward 2. Outward 2 is an open world action RPG developed by 9 Dot Studios. It is the sequel to the original Outward, and it aims to build on its predecessor's immersive and unforgiving gameplay. And when I mean unforgiving, I mean it was unforgiving. We get to explore a very large world, having dynamic combats, experiencing a pretty realistic survival system. Well, not as in-depth as the extreme survival games, but for an RPG, yeah, pretty out there. And the game was beautiful. It was brutal and beautiful. And something which I liked a lot, if you want to go into combat, you had to prepare yourself. And you really had to prepare yourself. Otherwise, you'd have a pretty bad time. In that game, you're not the superhero, you're not the chosen one. And the combat really reflected it. The world building and the lore were very interesting, and I remember several times stopping and thinking, gosh, the environment is simple, but it looks beautiful and dreamlike. I had an absolutely tremendous time playing the game from start to finish. Based on the current information we have, we are looking at a release window somewhere around late 2026, possibly a little bit further. Now, if we're lucky enough, maybe they will have an early access window as well, which would take us to early 2026. We don't know yet, and I will definitely let you guys know. Lastly, our honorable mention, Emberville. And if you don't know Emberville, you're not the only one. I discovered it just a couple of weeks ago. Emberville is an open world RPG developed by Cygnus Cross, or Sinus Cross maybe. The game is set in a world which is always changing, and that world is known as the Vitromotus. The player will explore a very large subterranean world, will craft items, mine resources, and you know the drill. But what makes it special is a little bit like Valheim. The world is procedurally generated, which could be a pro and a con. But in this case, they really looked at the worlds out there which were generated procedurally and learned from it. And Cygnus Cross brought in Cohh, the famous live streamer. They brought him in as a dev, and he's got views on loot mechanics and exploration, views which I absolutely respect. You can have a first look at the game in Cohh's YouTube channel, and I will put a link in the description. But so far, even though I'm not normally liking that style, that kind of style, more a kiddish style, I don't normally look forward to those styles of games. But I have to say that what I've seen, and when I've seen Cohh play the game, I was actually quite intrigued. The loot mechanics, the exploration look actually pretty good. So far, the game is expected to enter early access around the middle to the second half of next year, 2025. And given the typical development timelines, we would be expecting a release somewhere in 2026 or 2027. Guys, this was my list of most anticipated games, less known games for the time being. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, if any of those games piqued your interest, go on Steam and wishlist it. It is the best way to support those smaller developers. Thanks you for listening, and goodbye.